After its announcement in 1839, a wide range of applications for photography arose. None captivated the public like the photographic portrait did. At first, Daguerre thought that photographic portraits were impractical. Early attempts looked blurred due to the sitter moving during the long exposure times required. The chemistry making shortened exposure times possible improved swiftly, and contraptions such as these were developed to hold heads still. A Russian Daguerrean photo studio sprung up almost overnight. For portraits, the detailed silver-surfaced daguerreotype was preferred over the softer, less detailed calotype prints. American scientist and inventor Samuel F.B. Morse, of Morse code fame, was in Paris in 1839 demonstrating his electric telegraph and arranged a meeting with Daguerre. After seeing his process, Morse was impressed and brought the daguerreotype technique back with him to America. Even though at the time the medium was unpredictable, Morse is believed to have produced an extraordinary compilation of daguerreotype portraits of members of the Yale University class of 1810 when they gathered in 1840 for their 30th reunion. In light of today's standards, the total image is relatively small. Each portrait is only a half-inch high. In September 1839, the daguerreotype manual arrived in the United States. Within days, people were exhibiting their own daguerreotypes. The process was relatively expensive and technically difficult. Many people dabbled in it, but few people stayed with it. The newness of daguerreotype appealed to the American do-it-yourself or frontier mentality, and also their fascination with machines. Most daguerreotypists at the time were self-taught. The earliest daguerreotype portraits are often rigidly frontal. The sitter sat beneath a skylight in the photographer's studio, while reflectors and mirrors directed more light onto selected features. The rigid style and lack of smiling in early portraits is partially the result of the long exposure time and the head being fixed in a posing chair for up to 8 minutes, but it's also the result of 19th century painted portrait conventions. In painted portraits, such as the one here of Niepce, sitters wanted to be seen as serious people. Smiles were often interpreted as making one frivolous or silly. Notice how the photographic portrait of Daguerre on the right has borrowed the conventions of painting in the sitter's clothing, posture, and facial expression. The main reason for portraiture in both painting and photography was a documentary record of a person's life. With the advent of photography, many people who could not afford to pay a professional artist to paint their portrait could now afford to pay to have their likenesses captured in a photograph. The portrait was a way of presenting oneself. Some, such as this soldier, chose to have themselves photographed in their professional capacity. Others chose to present their hobbies or intellectual interests. Another genre of Victorian portraiture, post-mortem photos, often strike us as strange or morbid today. But in the 1800s, with photography a relatively new phenomenon, many people might have been photographed only once, if at all, during their life. Thus, post-mortem photographs were a way of documenting someone who may not have been photographed while alive. Child mortality was much higher then, so numerous daguerreotypes exist from this time which show women holding children who have passed. As in the last two examples, neither the photographer nor the sitter's name has been recorded. Famous daguerreotype operations, such as that of Southworth and Hawes, drew many people for their technical and aesthetic capabilities. Albert Sands Southworth and Josiah Johnson Hawes collaborated as the early photographic firm Southworth and Hawes. They were known for their quality and artistry. While their public portraits were solemn and stern, depicting the respectable nature of each sitter appropriately, the pair posed the private customer in ways to make the sitter's image seem expressive, approachable, and human. They knew that people wanted to see themselves as better than they might be, and they worked with lighting, composition, and the inherent characteristics of the process to enhance each subject. In addition, Southworth and Hawes employed hand coloring to their finished images. This was often done by Southworth's sister, Nancy, who worked for them. At the time, color photography had not yet been developed, but the men saw that there was a market for added detail to the daguerreotype, and so they offered this coloring service for an added fee. Another successful studio operator was Augustus Washington, an African American from Hartford, Connecticut, who later moved to Liberia and opened a daguerreotype studio there. In his powerful portrait of the abolitionist, Washington poses John Brown with his hand raised in the position of making a vow and the other hand grasping a flag. He captures Brown's intent gaze. Before the invention of photography, a working-class man like John Brown most likely would not have had a portrait made of him. Early on, Frederick Douglass, the African-American abolitionist speaker, writer, and statesman, grasped the power of the photograph as a weapon to challenge his nation's racism. He sat for as many portraits as he could in order to put out into the world images of a dignified, self-possessed African-American in order to combat racist blackface caricatures prevalent at the time. There are 160 surviving portraits of Douglass, more than any American in the 19th century. The first known photograph of Douglass, a daguerreotype, was taken in 1841, just 2 years after the process was invented, and more importantly, when he was in his early 20s, a fugitive, only 3 years removed from slavery, and when other African Americans were still enslaved. The last was taken in 1895, the year he died. In all of his existing photos, Douglass looks into the camera with purpose. He believed that photographs were a powerful means of moral and social influence and a very democratic form of art, allowing the poor and oppressed to find self-confidence. He wrote, quote, "The humblest servant girl may now possess a picture of herself such as the wealth of kings could not purchase 50 years ago." Unquote. There are images of Douglass in all of the prevailing photo techniques of the time, from daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and various types of prints made from collodion negatives, such as albumen prints, cabinet cards, etc. One of the ways in which Douglass disseminated his image was through carte de visites and cabinet cards. The carte de visite was a 2¼ by 3½ inch print made from a glass plate negative onto albumen paper and then mounted on a thin card. The French name derives from the common use of these photographs as visiting cards. This format was popularized in Europe in 1854, and it spread to the United States by 1858. The glass plate negative for these was made in a camera with multiple chambers, thus several images appear on one negative, and it brings the cost of the print down. Essentially, you get several for the price of one. Because they could be printed from a single negative, cartes de visite could be mass-produced. Cartes de visite were cheap, portable, and mailable. People traded and collected cartes de visite of family and friends, but they also wanted images of famous people to put into their albums. So if you did not personally know or encounter famous people to ask for their card, you could obtain one through numerous photography shops that sold them. This was a very lucrative business up until the mid-1860s, when the carte de visite fad then was replaced by another photo craze, which were cabinet cards. Cabinet cards were produced in the same way as carte de visites were, but on a larger format. They were meant for displaying on top of a cabinet. These became popular in the mid-1860s. The craze for them peaked in the late 1880s. One of the most famous carte de visites is this one taken by Matthew Brady. 3 months before his nomination as the Republican Party candidate for president, Abraham Lincoln went east, stopping in New York City on February 27, 1860, to give a speech to an overflowing crowd at the Cooper Union. Many considered Lincoln's powerful anti-slavery lecture as his most important one to date. His speech convinced his audience that he was not a country bumpkin, but a serious constitutional thinker and an eloquent representative for the party. Early in the day, he sat for this portrait at Matthew Brady's gallery, just a few blocks from the lecture hall. The result of this first of many portrait sessions with Brady was a simple but powerful image. From Brady's glass plate negative, Lincoln had numerous carte de visites printed by E. Anthony and Company in New York, which he then handed out to citizens across the country. He credits this image with helping him to win the presidency. So this photo has come to be known as, quote, the photograph that made Lincoln president. When Lincoln won the election that year, Harper's Magazine used this on their November 10, 1860 cover. The first photographic images printed in newspapers were actually wood engravings meticulously hand copied from a photograph. So this isn't actually a publication of Brady's photograph. This is a publication of a drawing of Brady's photograph. It was not until the 1890s, when the halftone process was developed, that images could be printed from photographs directly. Throughout the 19th century, photographers and their sitters have had varying reasons, some personal, some political, some financial, for making portraits. But as the technology of photography has progressed, the desire to capture a person's likeness remains constant.